Hello, my name is Guy Licht, and today I'll be talking about evolutionary misconceptions and misuses and how they've been used to suppress the masses. There's a lot of ways they have been done with eugenetics, racism, capitalism, and more, but first I want to go over some concepts and misunderstandings. One idea is the main mechanism of evolution is survival of the fittest. This is not true, and I'm going to debunk it in a couple ways. One of the main mechanisms, and usually the main mechanism, is egg drift, which is a change in population due to randomness. You have random inheritance. You inherit random things from parents. You might have in your family that every child is a daughter or son, or you might have seen that, or randomly that everyone in your family has one hair color in the second generation, when the first generation has more hair colors. Other things, this random survival. Bad things happen just randomly. Accidents are one of the most common forms of death. You could randomly get hit by a meteor. Something could randomly get run over by a truck. Just bad luck. And some people have randomly more offspring. They just find the love of their life and decide to have a bunch of kids. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad if having a bunch of kids. And this is the main mechanism on an individual or smaller scale. Why is that? So let me explain this graph. Not the best graph, but the blue dot is the best gene. And x-axis is how many times better it's compared to one single gene. And every other gene has the same amount how good it is. There's 10 other genes. The orange triangle is the best. It's the gene, not the best gene, but the gene that occurs the most. As you see that usually the gene that occurs the most is not the best gene. Even when the best gene is 20 times better, it didn't occur the most. Then look at it also this way. In the first 3 times that occurs the best, actually other genes occurred at the same frequency. Why is this? Well, imagine rolling a dice. If one is the best, and you still have 5 other sides. So if one is 2 times better than any other side, like 3, 4, or 5, or 6, or 2, if one is 2 times better, it's 2 to 5 ratio. The other one is there's still 2 to 5, still 2.5 times more likely that you roll another number. I mean, you have to be 5 times better to have a half a chance of winning 1. And then you have to be better, you have to be over 5 times. You're competing. If you have randomly one gene that's better, for you to have more offspring than everyone else, you have to be billions of times better than everyone else. Literally. That is, of course, until there's enough of you that you might dominate. So if there's half the world population already has the best gene, then that's a different circumstance. You can actually see this all the time, and there's been some papers on this. One of the interesting papers I found a long time ago was they took people's faces and they measured the width of the face, how wide the face is, how tall the face is, always different measurements. Same thing with the ears, the nose, and then they did a bunch of ratios. They also looked at symmetry and made up a bunch of numbers just trying to find one. They put a bunch of climate data and more and where people lived. They found no sign of positive evolution or positive selection or negative selection, just always an egg drift, except for maybe, and it's a maybe, nose height, so how far the nose goes away from your face, compared to nose width. And the idea is that in more dry climates, your nose is wider because a widened nose preserves moisture better. This was a very slight one, and they found a lot of exceptions, and that was a maybe. However, you can also see this in a bunch of games. And this also, by the way, I have the best face, but like I'm talking about everyone else. You can see this in a bunch of games in NFL, NBA, or any sports player. They don't always win, even if they're the best sports player or best sports team. In any competition, the best one doesn't always win. There's always a chance to some other ones. You can see in poker or card games too. So how is this relevant for the real world? Anything with a large population, if you have a very large population, there's a good chance that randomly something else is going to win out most of the time. If you have a few population, and you might win. Unstable population, you have more chance of the stuff randomly dying, but you also have more selective pressure. So sometimes unstable populations can help this and make it better. But that's when you go from a few to really big, then you don't have as much chance that if you go from few to very big fast, you do have a lot of random chance, but the good stuff is more likely to expand faster. Anything with large diversity, this is not likely to happen. Plant breeding, so a lot of times with plants, what plants get selected the best, like you breeding your plants, you might select for some good stuff, but a lot of the stuff that how the plant ends up is kind of random. The other example is something called genetic algorithms that I'm using here, where we try to optimize something, like we're trying to design a house and we have all these parameters or a bridge or something, and we just randomly change it and we select over and over again from like an initial population, mimicking evolution, what's the best bridge design. So I start off with 10 bridge designs randomly. I pick 5 bridge designs. Out of 10, I make those 10 again by just randomly changing up. A lot of that chance of what my end design is going to be random. And the way around that is I have to use really complex selection algorithms and all this other stuff. But to some extent, randomness is going to take a role, and we do see that. We also, survival of the fittest really doesn't work on an individual level as fast or fair. And this comes in a big deal in capitalism. If everyone just sold hot dogs, which is ridiculous, for me to actually have a fair chance, my hot dog has to be 1 billion times better than everyone else's hot dog for random chance not to be the main mechanism. Billions of times better. It's even worse if something has a bigger of the market share. If something has a bigger market share, if something is 100 times bigger than me, I have to be 100 times better to compete against them in a lot of cases. So yeah, big stuff tends to survive, or small stuff tends to randomly die. And even worse is, the best way in any system with like this is to destroy your enemies, not to have the best. And we see this with other organisms, like sabotaging other creatures. But if I'm in a friendly competition, I have to be better than you. If I destroy you and I'm bigger but I'm not as good, or if we gang up, then I have a fair chance. So yeah, again, hot dog analogy, I may not be better, but if everyone else destroys you because you're better, I will win. The next effect I want to talk about, and this means that, do not think that any population is different because it's better. It's probably bullshit. The founder effect. So that's the next one, and it's pretty related to genetic drift. And that's basically you work with what your parents gave you, not the best. We can see this in this little diagram where randomly we just choose a population with more yellowish, orange, lighter colored dots than the reddish, maroon, darker dots. So we're more likely to have colors later on that look like that. Again, very similar, but there's less just random inheritance and survival. It's just more randomly choosing. This leads oftentimes to very junky solutions, or solutions that's just built on bad ideas. And we can see this all the time in just evolution in general. One famous example is the panda's thumb. There's a book written about that by Stephen Jay Gould, but he uses other examples. But there's also a guy that literally studied the panda's thumb his whole entire life for a couple decades and wrote a couple 100 pages just on panda's thumbs. So yeah, there was a world expert on panda's thumbs. But we have a thumb and many other ones, but bears lost the thumbs during evolution. So, and it's just preserved as this little tiny little thing here. So when pandas needed to grip bamboo, they took some of the bones down here and evolved into like a pseudo thumb. The pseudo thumb is not as good as a real thumb, and has more likely to get problems. But it works. But it's what they worked with, what they got with, and yeah, not the best solution. But in the human body is even more examples, arguably. We evolved from animals that walked on all fours, and those animals did not, or swing from vines, and those animals have a totally different back design that works for them. But we needed to stand up straight with our head in a certain position, so we got all these bends and twists in the back, which leads to all these back problems. It also leads to back problems, lead to problems with your legs. It means you're less active. It can lead to nerve damage, which always other health problems. If we had a straighter spine, we'll be so much healthier, so many less problems, and we could even lift more weight and run farther and do so much more. But we worked with what we got with, and we just kept modifying it. Another, I think, even more extreme example that people are not as aware of is the sinus cavity. Most animals have the sinus cavity, everything is above. And these little big pockets here and everything else directly drains with gravity. When something drains with gravity, it is so much better. It means we don't get any congestion, you get less sinus problems, allergies are not as big deal. But we have this complex labyrinth, and a lot of great primates have it, because our faces got squished and warped, leading to this, and horrible. And if we had a snout, we wouldn't have this. Now, there is one great primate that evolved a way around this, that's the orangutan, which just lost the bottom ones and got the big ones enlarged, but we don't have that. And that's why you get allergies and all these other problems. Hiccups are also caused by this. Blue eyes, we think, oh, just tagged along, and it's just randomly because some people had blue eyes that colonized the place. Blonde and red hair, we think, also tagged along with genes for lighter skin and lactose tolerance, which often happens. But another one that's detrimental, not just there, is how our nerves look. So look at this nerve that goes all the way down and then goes back up. Very bad design. It also goes around a major artery. This means much longer it is, the more likely it gets damaged. This nerve controls speaking, it controls a lot of things with breathing, it can cause hiccups, swallowing problems. So really bad design, but basically, when we evolved from fish, that artery curved around that nerve. And it used to be not around that nerve because it used to be straight before we land with the neck. And that just messed up our lives. And you saw how extreme it is. Giraffes have it goes down the whole neck and back up. Very bad design, horrible idea. So how is this useful in real life? Well, sometimes it's just good to start over again, literally. We use this a lot in computer programs that have some randomness in it. It's that we repeat the program several times because we randomly might find a better solution and not get stuck on these bad solutions. It also means with like any system in human society, sometimes we just need a fresh start. Maybe if an institution's 5,000 years old, maybe we should rethink that institution and start over again from the bottom up. I mean, it could just be stuck in a place. It's important to think and use logical reasoning and not just accept something because it's the way it is and think it must be good. Again, it could be stuck because of the founders and it just evolved to get more complex and these minor fixes. Again, evolution is not the best. And don't think a group of people is the best because they have a certain way or they evolved to be the best for the climate or how they live. And sometimes even bad genes in evolution can be good, which is a weird idea, but we apply this to computer algorithms and more. And in the lab, when people use artificial evolution, that's because you can get stuck at a global maximum. Because if you go a little bit off or a little bit off other way, it's not that, it's worse. Like, if we change our sinus cavity slightly, we're not going to get improvement. But if we make it super bad, we have to start all over again, and that forces us to find a new, better idea. It also leads to the idea of perfect amount of instability for survival, where if something's too stable, randomness takes over, or the big groups are more likely to survive, and small groups have no chance. But if something is too unstable, everything just dies out before it has a chance. And that means that whenever you have any idea, it's good to introduce new ideas, but like you don't want an unstable place where everything is changing every single day, new government every single day, but you can't keep the same society for too long. But there's another way around all of this: group selection and sex. And yes, I said sex. So finding a mate can work beyond just random chance, because you're thinking about who you're finding, and you might select a better thing. This includes like sex preferences, also fads, and fads can promote genetic diversity. Like what whales find most attractive actually changes with the songs from season to season in what appears to be fads. And these fads mean that there's a more genetic diversity, so the minor groups are less likely to die out. And actually it promotes, fads usually start off with a very small group than minorities. We also see this with bird songs and also bird correlation. Some people have put this up with dresses and stuff. It might also be that it shows intelligence or social awareness, which is positive traits usually. Some people also put that with kinks, and I just put the strangest kinks I put here, could think of. Also, just not mating too close might promote more diversity and keep genes longer alive that would have otherwise died out. However, diversity can be bad. It can be harder to find a good mix with when you have too high of a diversity. So, if you think about genes as like recipes for food, if you try mixing a cake mix recipe, a soup recipe, and a pickle recipe, you're going to get something disgusting most likely. It's too many different things that are too different. If you try to mix only a cake mix recipes together, you might end up with a better cake. Soup too, or a pickle mix only. This is a huge problem with like computers and software sometimes, is that we just have too many different types of softwares and computers that they're all incompatibility, and you get a lot of compatibility issues and stuff like that. But again, also, moving on to the third point, when you're mixing stuff that's close together, you're more likely to get rid of recessive bad traits, recessive genes, or promote the evolution of good recessive genes, or complex genes that are interacting are more likely to again and again promote evolution. This also is again a point for like evolutionary algorithms. And animals find all ways around this. Chickens find a balance by choosing the second cousins, not too close, not too far. But there's more complex ways around it. A lot of organisms have sexual and asexual reproduction stages, so they do a little bit of both. And some of them, it depends on the environment. So they both have ways of getting rid of recessive genes and finding a maximum with the same amount, but also keeping diversity. Some of them have population booms, which can promote minor ones to grow very fast, but then they decreases and it can weed out a lot of stuff faster. And then there's more complex strategies like with jewelweed, which is a very beautiful plant that I pictured here. And if you put its leaves underwater, they glisten and almost glow, hence the name jewelweed. They mate with themselves and produce very inbred offspring. But those inbred offspring stay close to the plant, where they're in an environment they're more likely to survive in, but they're also more likely to be better adapted to the local environment because they're close to their parents. They also have ones that have sex with other jewelweeds, and those ones spread a lot farther, and they're a lot bigger gamble because they're mixing up much more random things together. But they're also, the environment far away is much more random, so it's a bigger gamble for something you don't know as much. And some people have tried to apply this to evolution of other animals, that some animals are more adventurous than other ones in the same group, but that's much more controversial and much less evidence. But even with all this, you're still adapting to your time. And this is what a big problem with people promoting, like, oh, this evolutionary trait is the best in human beings, or this old company is the best, or anything old or something is the best, or even saying something is the best because it's surviving bit now. If you know in the future that like fossil fuel companies might be wonderful like 100 years ago, but if you knew about global warming, you might have not even invested in fossil fuels 100 years ago because you know it's going to be bad in the long run. And yeah, so like some stuff is best for now, but not in the long run. And you can see stuff like high blood pressure. Human beings used to be good. It's good if you get your arm bitten off, less likely to faint. It's good if you have severe blood loss. A lot of disease is good, but in the modern world, it's more likely to kill you for cardiac arrest, the number one killer in most places. Sickle cell anemia, good against malaria, not good anymore in most places. Snakes and bugs are more feared than guns, which doesn't make sense in most places. Diabetic genes are good against starving to death, but you can also argue that with anything that maybe it was good 50 or 100 years ago when it adapted, but not anymore. And if you think that's good because it's big, you're wrong, or it's common. Just because something's common doesn't mean it's good. And another one, and I'll get to this awful guy, is group selection is really important. And I said that on the individual level, having diverse amount of faces is not, there's no number one face, but having a diverse amount of faces might actually be good. It might lead to identification better of everyone. If everyone looked like me, no one could figure out how anybody looked like, honestly. Everyone just looked the same and it would be hard to socially interact. But another example is, if some organisms, half the animal runs to the left, half the animals run to the right. If instead all of them went to one direction, left or right, a predator would always know to go to the left or the right. By having half-half, a predator is confused and can never choose the best option. Same as with rock, paper, scissors too. If you always choose rock, it's pretty easy to figure out how to beat you. But if you randomly choose, it's the hardest to beat you. Other times that being similar is better because, yeah, if you're in a part if you can work together because can communicate better, or that if I'm an awful group that's out there to kill you, then being different is not better if my difference is about suppressing you and hurting you. And yeah, like you could be the greatest person on earth, but if everyone hates you, it's useless. So what does this mean for people? Well, diversity can be good if accommodated. If having diverse ways of people thinking and stuff can be good. Like neurodiversity is good. Having people with dyslexia can increase creativity in other ways, and it can lead people to also, because dyslexics are more talented in some ways, they might figure out better ways to help you read or make science and stuff more clear, which I have. Or autism can be good because it can lead to special interests that can help people, but we also need people that do not have this, that have better organized or something like that, or better with languages. But also, like, if someone is disabled and can't move around as much, but if we accommodate them, then that disability doesn't matter, and something else matters more than mine and stuff like that. We create our environment. Very few people are living nowadays out inside in the jungle all by themselves. That's a useless way of making it. If we look at making society itself stronger instead of the individual, that's much more strong society. And you can look at animals like beavers and termites and wasps and bees all manipulate the environment to make it good for them. Part of evolution would actually be making the environment suit you, not suiting your environment. And it's stupid to look at that way. I mean, it's also, we can't judge what's the best. Human beings have an awful way of judging. We have sexism, racism. So yeah, just accommodate other people and don't judge. And we're also all in this together. And we can see that with social animals like beaver, termites, wasps, bees, and more. So I want to talk, but off track a little bit, that I want to talk about this awful guy, Richard Dawkins, which is a total pseudoscience by most evolutionary biologists, but is very popular with so-called radical atheists. And people do not really understand science, and a lot of white supremacist groups. And this is a picture of him. And this is a picture of his family with the guns. And those are African people in Kenya. Yeah, not the best picture, but realistic. So Richard Dawkins believes that individual genes, not just the individual organism, is what makes a creature survive. And this idea is promoted so much that it's competition between competition, when a lot of times organisms work together. We don't fully understand how that happens. We know it's true. And E.U. Wilson and Stephen Jay Gould have taken down with such examples, termites and stuff, but people still love this guy. This guy, to discredit him, he called Muslims bad and said they're drunk perverts. And he calls them drunk all the time and says they have a drinking problem, which does not make sense because Islam doesn't believe in drinking alcohol. He also called Jews delusional, not logical, and subservient, and really attacks Jewish people, Muslims. He also attacks Hindus and tribal religions and indigenous religions. Doesn't attack really Christians that much. I wonder why. But yeah, attacks them, and he's never seen a Jewish argument, but he thinks Jews never argue and just follow the leader. It's much more like he's thinking about Catholics with like the structure. But why is he so messed up? Well, he's literally a British and French colonizer, and he's popular with people from that. His dad and mom, his dad was in charge of the subjugation force in Kenya. His dad was the general in charge of the army to subjugate. His whole family was in charge of the subjugation of Africa. His mom was in charge of the more bureaucratic ways, and they were in charge of the armed forces that went into country to subjugate people and keep people. And they're in charge of increasing productivity and getting the food from there. His family was literal colonizers, and he grew up with hundreds of African servants. This guy, and he just mentioned this in like the Britannica page. This is a little footnote, or famous people like little footnote. And yeah, so like, yeah, I would totally recommend instead reading these guys. So E.U. Wilson talks about termites, ants, bees, and wasps, and more, and always use social insects and how they evolved. That's his research study. I recommend reading him, not listening to him. He's not that good of a speaker, personally, in my opinion. Oliver Sacks talks about neurodivergent rights, and he talks about how neurodiversity can be really good and how different mindsets can be good. And he's just an amazing guy. He survived a lot of horrible illnesses, a lot longer than expected. He was had a bunch of weightlifting records and swimming records for a while in California. They were eventually defeated. He also was a gay rights activist and was gay himself, had face blindness, and wrote a lot of excellent books and stories. And he's also an excellent speaker. Stephen Jay Gould, he's a writer extraordinaire, and he's one of the most widely respected evolutionary biologists, but he also was a natural historian and did a lot of really good research, and also had like similar amazing life to Oliver Sacks. But he wrote other things like Misconceptions of Man, which is an excellent book about how people try to figure out what was the best race, and they just messed it up. And this is a big thing. People are horrible at figuring out who's the most intelligent or what, because all of our measurements are biased and inaccurate. And he showed that all the inaccuracies and how, like, one guy had over 20 measurements to try to figure out intelligence. He had brain size, but brain size didn't correlate perfectly with race, so he compared it to skull size, then he compared it to gut size, and he added more and more things until he could kind of make a measurement that's combined 20 different measurements for a few data points. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, the lengths he went. Full House is another one of his books, and the idea is, and this is another thing in evolution, is bacteria are some of the best organisms. They're small and they're simple. Some of the best things you can have in an organism. When you're simple, there's less things that can go wrong. When you're small, there's more space you can occupy. But there's a limit to how small you can get. What you saw in this picture, and he calls that the left wall. And there's a limit to how many organisms how simple they can get. So stuff just randomly gets bigger and bigger and bigger and more complex, because that's all that's left. it can't become simpler. So stuff just randomly builds up over time. And he's one of the most widely read in the field, an amazing guy. He also came up with the idea of punctuated equilibrium, which is another misconception that evolution is slow and takes a lot of time. What punctuated equilibrium, and it's linear, what punctuated equilibrium says is it goes really fast, really slow, really fast, really slow, really fast, really slow. And the reason why this happens is, well, a bunch of reasons. Sometimes you have a random event that wipes out a lot of creatures, then randomly a bunch of new niches are opened up and creatures can evolve really fast. Or you could have a creature evolve something that's so spectacular that pushes evolution to hyperdrive. Examples of this is like the first creatures that could go on land. They have a new area for them to evolve, so they can spread and evolve and diversify super quickly. Or jaws. Jaws promote a lot of evolution because now they can eat so much more things. Whereas those things have to now worry about predators so much more that could crush them. And that means more defenses and stuff. And this is evolution goes to hyperdrive now and then. And we see this in the lab with experiments with viruses and bacteria. We see this out in nature, but we also see this in computer models. Amazing guy. So yes, that is my presentation. And we should stop thinking that evolution promotes the best, that any system like capitalism is based on evolution, based on simple evolution will work. We need to promote accommodations instead, because accommodations, making society better itself, is better than trying to randomly compete against each other. And yeah, we just need more carefully think about this. Thank you for your time. If any questions, feel free to DM me.